Well, hello, all learning based agents tuning in to what might not sound like the most exciting video in history, paragraph 7 of the TAR 1 to 4 family residential contract. However, I appreciate your investment in your mastery of the contracts. It will certainly give you, and more importantly, your clients, an advantage in negotiating the best possible deal. Let's dive right in. Paragraph 7 deals with property condition, and we're going to take it section by section. A. Access, inspection, and utilities. Seller shall permit buyer and buyer's agents access to the property at reasonable times. Buyer may have the property inspected by inspectors selected by buyer and licensed by TREC, or otherwise permitted by law to make inspections. That's a very general statement. It includes a house inspector, HVAC inspector, roof inspection, WDI inspection, pool inspection, any type of inspection necessary to satisfy the buyer as to the property's condition. Any hydrostatic testing must be separately authorized by seller in writing. Seller at seller's expense shall immediately cause existing utilities to be turned on and shall keep the utilities on during the time this contract is in effect. Hydrostatic testing is where a master plumber comes in and clogs up the system and then fills it with water to pressurize the pipes and the entire plumbing system to determine if there are any leaks. If you think through that, oh my goodness, what could go wrong? He's trying to determine if there's a leak by putting the system under pressure. What's going to happen if there is a leak is it's going to spring a leak. You can imagine all kinds of terrible things could come out of that. And that's why hydrostatic testing is not automatically authorized by this contract, but has to be addressed in a separate addendum to this contract. And in that addendum, it identifies, among other things, who is going to pay if something goes drastically wrong, if the pipes burst, if it floods the house. Is it the seller? Is it the buyer? Is it some other configuration? So, just speaking personally, as a listing agent, I would never allow my client to agree to having a hydrostatic test done. And you might say, well, Frank, why not? If there's nothing wrong with the house, why not let it be tested? Imagine this. The home is functioning properly, no leaks in the plumbing system. We put it under pressure, it springs a leak. On the second floor, it floods down to the first floor. There's $12,000 of damages done to the house. Of course, we had the hydrostatic addendum completed, which says the buyer would pay for any repairs. However, is the buyer really going to write the seller a check for $12,000? I doubt it. So now the seller is going to have to be involved in a lawsuit, incur additional expense, no guarantee they're going to ever collect on that money. So I would just never allow my seller to put themselves in that position, regardless of any promises to pay on the part of the buyer. Look at that very last sentence. Seller at seller's expense shall immediately cause existing utilities to be turned on and shall keep the utilities on during the time this contract is in effect. Many sellers think they're going to save money on utilities. Once they move out of the house, they have the electricity and gas and water turned off. That should never happen in Texas because when the utilities are off, the home begins to deteriorate immediately because of our heat, and even humidity in the winter time when it's not so hot can very quickly lead to mold growth and disintegration of the home. But the contract says that once we go under contract, it's illegal not to have the utilities on. They must be on so that the buyer can conduct the necessary tests. B, seller's disclosure notice pursuant to Chapter 5.008 of the Texas Property Code. And here we are given three options. One, the buyer has received the notice. As a listing agent, you always want that box checked. And the most efficient way of ensuring that it's checked is to provide all the disclosures on the MLS, so that when a buyer's agent is preparing an offer using this document, they already have access to the notice. First of all, that's a professional thing to do. Provide all the information up front. It's serving your sellers at a high level. But it goes beyond merely providing information, because if you have not provided the seller's disclosure at time of offer, number 2 comes into play. Let's see what happens. Buyer has not received the notice. Within blank number of days after the effective date of this contract, seller shall deliver the notice to buyer. If buyer does not receive the notice, Buyer may terminate this contract at any time prior to the closing, and the earnest money will be refunded to buyer. If seller delivers the notice, buyer may terminate this contract for any reason within 7 days after buyer receives the notice or prior to the closing, whichever first occurs, and the earnest money will be refunded to buyer. So, listing agent, if you do not provide these disclosures right up front at time of contract, you in effect can give the buyer an extension on the option period. So let's just say, for example, your option period is 10 days, but your seller doesn't deliver the documents to you and you don't provide them to the buyer's agent until day 5. Well, they automatically get a 7-day extension from there. So now our 10-day option period has turned into 12 days. And those could be 2 critical days. And if the seller delays providing the documents beyond that, or if you do because you're on vacation and haven't made arrangements for somebody to take care of your business, it could go right up until the day of closing. Do not do that. Provide the best possible service to your client by putting those documents on the MLS. 3, the seller is not required to furnish the notice under the Texas Property Code. You are probably aware by now that under certain circumstances, the seller doesn't have to provide a disclosure. You may ask, well, what are those circumstances? We have a clue right here in the document. It tells us that the Texas Property Code identifies those circumstances. So it's a fairly simple matter. Let's see what kind of live internet skills we have here. I'm just going to type in Texas Property Code. There we go. Let's just pull up here. This PDF looks reasonable. And you may recall that this was paragraph 5.008. Let's see if we can find that. Have we found it? Are we there? Search, please. Okay, well, there we go. That's what happens on live television. Let's try another way to do this. Disclosure. And see what other options we have. What we are looking for. Here we go. That's actually not it. I just know by having seen this previously. So we're in subchapter E. Boy, this should be easier. All right. Just one more time, bear with me. 5.008. Oh, you know what we did? See, this great learning lesson. We went to a subsection of the property code that does not include 5008. Let's see if we can start with the right. Let's just check this one. If we can get the entire property code. This looks more promising. See, this is how the sausage is made. There we go. See, you got to start with the right document. Section 5.008. It goes through all the requirements of the seller's disclosure, all the things that the seller must disclose. And let me make a quick point here. Texas Property Code doesn't say that realtors must provide this or listed properties must provide disclosure. It's any seller. And so if you want to develop a business with FSBOs for sale by owners, perhaps knock on their door. Don't ask to list their home, but provide them with a blank copy of the seller's disclosure and inform them that according to the Texas Property Code, every seller is required to provide this document to prospective purchasers. And you will have served them at a high level and put yourself in a very good position to win their business when they do have a realtor list. Here we go. So we scroll down in paragraph 5.008 to this section E, which says this section requiring the disclosure does not apply to a transfer, and there are 11 circumstances right here. I'm going to spare you the tedium of reading all of them to you, but just recognize foreclosure, bankruptcy by a mortgagor, a fiduciary in the administration of an estate, so someone has died. Here we go. This is less well known. From one co-owner to another, from a spouse or to another person in any lineal line of consanguinity, which means bloodline. So grandfather, father, grandson, and so on. If there's a blood relationship, it's not required. To or from any government entity. We skipped over 8. Between spouses as a result of a separation decree or divorce, not required. 10, a new residence not previously occupied. So a builder does not have to provide a seller's disclosure, for example. And then finally, very interestingly, number 11, real property where the value of any dwelling does not exceed 5% of the value of the property. So you have an acreage property and it's got some old sharecropper shack at the back corner. It's falling down. It has no value, perhaps even a mobile home. No, you do not need a seller's disclosure in those situations because the value of the structure doesn't exceed 5% of the value of the property. And you'll often determine these properties in the MLS from the listing agent's statement that the property is being sold for land value only. In other words, they're not assigning any value to the structure at all. That's your clue that a seller's disclosure is not required in that circumstance. Well, there you go. We've gotten all the way through 7A and 7B. Let's take a look at 7C. Seller's disclosure of lead-based paint and lead-based paint hazards is required by federal law for a residential dwelling constructed prior to 1978. Trick question I like to ask is, do we have to require this disclosure if a home is built in 1978? The answer is no. It's prior to 1978. And just a little sideline, people were aware of lead-based paint hazards long before 1978. And so most paint manufacturers had taken lead out years before. Most homes painted in the 70s did not have lead-based paint. As a child in the 60s, I was being bombarded with commercials during Saturday morning cartoons warning us about the dangers, warning kids, don't eat the peeling paint that's in the windowsill. Even though it's sweet, because lead is sweet, it's dangerous to you. So even if a home was built in 73, 75, 77, it's unlikely it has lead-based paint, but the disclosure is still required. Paragraph D. Acceptance of property condition. As is means the present condition of the property with any and all defects and without warranty except for the warranties of title and the warranties in this contract. Buyer's agreement to accept the property as is under paragraph 7D1 or 2 does not preclude buyer from inspecting the property under paragraph 7A, from negotiating repairs or treatments in a subsequent amendment, or from terminating this contract during the option period, if any. This is a very confusing paragraph to people who move to Texas from other states, where they often write contracts subject to inspection. We don't do that. If we're not aware of any defects in the property at time of contract, we write the contract as is, then we discover defects through inspections in the option period, and then we negotiate repairs. And the seller's option is, if they're not happy with the outcome of those negotiations, is to terminate the contract and receive their earnest money back. So if you're not aware of any hazards, you select box 1. If you are aware of conditions requiring repair, you check box 2 and you go ahead and write that in there. Broken window in living room shall be repaired, roof shall be replaced, etc. But if you're not aware, you check as is. Paragraph E, lender required repairs and treatments. Unless otherwise agreed in writing, neither party is obligated to pay for lender-required repairs, which includes treatment for wood-destroying insects. If the parties do not agree to pay for the lender-required repairs or treatments, this contract will terminate and the earnest money will be refunded to buyer. This is not referring to repair issues which are discovered by the buyer during the inspection period. This is when a lender comes in, which is typically an FHA or VA, appraiser and they say, that roof is 18 years old, it's got to be replaced, or the decking on the wood decking is rotten and needs to be replaced. In those situations, if all these lender required repairs exceed 5%, if neither the buyer or seller agree to pay for these repairs, then the contract will terminate. The earnest money is refunded to the buyer. Now, there is a caveat. Look at the last sentence. If the cost of lender required repairs and treatments exceeds 5% of the sale price, buyer may terminate this contract and the earnest money will be refunded to buyer. What that means is the lender requires, say, a roof replacement. And this is a home, the contract price is $100,000. And let's say that the roof repair is $7,000. And the seller agrees to make the repair. Does the buyer have to go ahead and proceed? No, because that $7,000 is more than 5% of the contract price. So even though the seller has agreed to make the repair, the buyer still has the right to terminate, should they wish to do so, and receive a refund of their earnest money. Let me pause briefly to plug in a power cord. Be right back. Okay, we're back, powered up and fired up. Let's rock and roll here. We're down to paragraph F, completion of repairs and treatments. Unless otherwise agreed in writing, seller shall complete all agreed repairs and treatments prior to the closing date, not after. And I have seen agents try to write this into the contract that after closing, the seller will go ahead and take care of these issues. No, you never want to do that. The contract even says it prior. All required permits shall be obtained, and repairs and treatments must be performed by persons who are licensed to provide such repairs or treatments, or, if no license is required by law, are commercially engaged in the trade of providing such repairs or treatments. For example, there's a roof leak, and Uncle Harry likes to do his own work, so he's going to come over and repair the roof. Well, unless he's a roofer, that's not permitted. Now, roofing doesn't require a license, but you have to be commercially engaged. You have to be a roof repair person, or for example, a handyman could do that repair if roof repairs are part of their normal trade. If it's an entire roof replacement, it couldn't be a handyman, certainly couldn't be Uncle Joe. It would need to be a professional roofer, a roofing company. If it's a plumbing issue, and plumbing is licensed, so it had to be a licensed plumber. If it's an electrical issue, it has to be a licensed electrician. Now, let me just add also, since most of these repairs are not identified in 7D2, right above here, but in fact repairs are identified in a repair amendment, I often see agents writing in the amendment, all these repairs shall be done by persons licensed to perform such tasks. Completely unnecessary. And TREC frowns on agents writing things in contracts that are already in the contract. The provisions of paragraph F apply to any amendments to the contract. So you never need to specify that a licensed person or someone professionally engaged in the trade will perform the repairs. It's already here. At buyer's election, any transferable warranties received by seller with respect to the repairs and treatments will be transferred to buyer at buyer's expense. If seller fails to complete any agreed repairs and treatments prior to the closing date, buyer may exercise remedies under paragraph 15, and there's really two remedies specified in paragraph 15. One, the buyer may terminate the contract and receive a refund of the earnest money, or they may enforce specific performance. They may sue to require the seller to complete those repairs and treatments. Those are the two options. But there's a third option, or they can extend the closing date up to 5 days if necessary for seller to complete the repairs and treatments. So the seller's working, they're trying, just didn't get it all done. The buyer can unilaterally extend the closing date up to 5 days to allow time for that. G, environmental matters. Buyers advise that the presence of wetlands, toxic substances, including asbestos and wastes or other environmental hazards, or the presence of a threatened or endangered species or its habitat may affect buyer's intended use of the property. If buyer is concerned about these matters, an addendum promulgated by TREC or required by the parties should be used. The addendum itself doesn't say a lot more than what this paragraph does. That addendum is rarely used in subdivision properties where They've gone through several cycles of ownership, and there's no reason to believe there's wetlands or asbestos or environmental hazards or endangered species. But if you're selling a rural property, an acreage property, certainly an industrial property, which obviously wouldn't be covered by this contract, but you get the idea. If there's any reason that the buyer should have concern about that property, what's gone on before, or what endangered species, habitat may be there now, then you want to use that promulgated addendum. H, residential service contracts. Buyer may purchase a residential service contract from a residential service company licensed by TREC. If buyer purchases a residential service contract, seller shall reimburse buyer at closing for the cost of the residential service contract in an amount not exceeding blank. In Texas at this time, you can buy 12-month home warranty contracts for as little as $395, more typically $425 or $450. Personal appliances, personal property appliances such as refrigerator, washer, and dryer are not covered by a standard home warranty, so that would be an additional fee, typically about $75. If there's a pool and the pool equipment needs to be covered by the warranty, that's going to be another $100, $125. So you want to factor all of that in when inserting the amount in this blank. Of course, keep in mind if you're being very aggressive in your offer price, and let's say that the total cost of that home warranty is going to be $750, you may not try to get all that from the seller. You may just put $500, knowing that your buyer will come out of pocket $250. But keep in mind, let's say that you put $750 in here, and the actual cost of the home warranty that was selected was only $500. What happens to that $250? It is retained by the seller. Okay, so make sure that you put in an amount here, I would say an exact amount that you anticipate using if you want to maximize those dollars. And you do that simply by contacting your home warranty rep, get them to share their latest pricing information with all the optional coverages, and have your buyer choose. The purchase of a residential service contract is optional. Similar coverage may be purchased from various companies authorized to do business in Texas. In other words, buyer, you have choices. Well, there you go. You hung in there with me all the way through paragraph 7. Please check out our videos covering paragraphs 1 through 6 and videos to come covering 8 through the end of the contract. It's been my pleasure. Anytime I can help you with your understanding of the contracts, give me a call. I'm here to help.